So you would like to bank in Europe. Maybe you've been sold on Swiss private banking, or mid-shore banking in a place like Georgia or Armenia. Or you could just be hunting for offshore banking in a place like the Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, Cyprus, or Malta. Well, these are just a few of the many European banking hubs that foreign non-residents and European residents can access. And in this video, I'm going to be shedding light on some of the more popular options, as well as a few of the lesser known European banking hubs. But this is not a geography lesson. We're talking banking. So that means I'm going to be sharing important considerations, risks, deposit amounts, and other details that you're not going to find anywhere else. So if you're interested in opening bank accounts in Europe, this video is for you. Now, if this is your first time on the channel, my name is Chris, and I'm the head of banking relationships at Global Banks. We help investors and entrepreneurs navigate cross-border banking and financial services, helping them solve problems and establish new banking relationships. And in many cases, this means helping clients find and open accounts with the best banks that match their profile in Europe. Quick sidebar here. If you prefer to have all of these details at your fingertips, you can actually grab a copy of Where to Bank in Europe from the pinned comment below. It's 100% free, so grab it now or at the end of the video. All right, so let's talk European banking. Where should you open? Well, that does depend on your profile, meaning your citizenship, residency, desired deposit, transaction activities, your objectives, economic substance, and many more details. But generally speaking, Europe is home to 5 types of banks, which are available across a wide range of countries. And these banks, they include retail banks, private banks, premier banks, offshore banks, and transactional banks. Though for the purpose of this video, we're going to be skipping over retail banking options, since these they typically focus on local businesses and local individuals. Though there are some exceptions, especially in places like Poland, Portugal, Czech Republic, and a few other countries, but I'm going to be covering those in another video. Actually, if you have any interest in those other European banking hubs, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get alerted when we post those videos. But like I said, in this video, I'm primarily focusing on premier, private, and offshore banking. And that's because these banks, they typically support the objectives of foreign non-residents. So let's take a look at where you can find these banks, who should open in each of these countries, and what you're going to need to put down in terms of a deposit when opening accounts. And the first country that we're going to look at is Andorra. Now, we haven't talked about Andorra in a while, but Andorra is relatively low risk. It offers personal and private banking, and it offers remote account opening. Now, the deposits here, they're relatively low, and account opening can be done with relative ease. But if you've been around the banking world for long enough, you've probably seen Andorra ebb and flow in terms of popularity. And that's because there's both good reasons to bank in Andorra, as well as good reasons to avoid banking in Andorra. Though as always, it does depend on your profile, which we're gonna dig into a little bit here. Now, in case you're not familiar with Andorra, this is a tiny landlocked microstate. It's sandwiched between France and Spain, and it's known for skiing, cheap cigarettes, and very low taxes. It has virtually no unemployment, it's not part of the EU, and it has an excellent residency option for anyone looking to move themselves or their business for tax advantages. And when it comes to banking, it's a low commitment entry point to European private banking. I say low commitment because when it comes to opening accounts for foreigners and non-residents, what we're really talking about in Andorra is private banking and wealth management. And the deposits that these individuals have to make in Andorra, they typically range between $100,000 and $300,000. And that's considerably lower than most other European private banking hubs. But I do need to warn you, Andorran banks, they can have pretty aggressive fee schedules, and they're less open to negotiating than many of the other private banks that you'll find in places like Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and other European private banking hubs. So before you open here, please make sure you review the fee schedule. Okay, now the next country that we're going to discuss is Austria. We view Austria as a low-risk jurisdiction in terms of banking. You can find both personal, private, and some business banking here, and plus accounts, they can be opened remotely, and deposits are pretty reasonable when compared to similar jurisdictions, depending on the type of account that you're trying to open. So if it isn't clear, we like Austria. It's an interesting country. In fact, while it is an EU member state, it doesn't act like one. Instead, it's effectively sandwiched between Eastern and Western Europe in terms of politics, economics, and banking and finance. This is largely a hangover from the Allied occupation after World War II, which eventually resulted in constitutional neutrality. You can thank Stalin for that one. Now, what this means in terms of banking and finance is actually quite interesting. It results in many of the banks in Austria being more comfortable with onboarding clients from the Unlucky Passport Club, CIS member states, or anyone who's just having more difficulty opening accounts in other EU jurisdictions. Basically, Austria's neutral stance has made Austrian banks more flexible to certain citizenship and residency combinations that typically struggle to bank elsewhere. Now, in terms of banking, Austria has a wide range of options to choose from small, family-run private banks with very exclusive clientele to large commercial banks that are able to support the needs of international clients. Though, depending on your profile and what you're specifically looking for, you can almost always find better options in other jurisdictions. That is, unless you have one of the passports that's going to find it very difficult to open in those other jurisdictions. In that case, Austria can be a very interesting option. And if you do decide to explore Austrian banking for yourself, either for offshore or private banking and wealth management, what you're going to be looking at in terms of deposit is typically going to range between $500,000 and $1 million as a starting point. And again, this is going to be for those traditional private banks that you would expect to find in other parts of Europe. Okay, now before we jump into the next country, if you're getting any value out of this country-related content, can you just do me a quick favor? Hit that like button so we know that we should keep making more videos like this for you in the near future. And if you don't like this type of country content, feel free to drop a comment below and let us know what you'd prefer to see instead. All right, so let's dig into the next country, and that is the Republic of Georgia. Now, it's a bit hard to assess the risk in Georgia, but let's call it a medium. And we view Georgia as more of a personal banking hub than anything else. And accounts, they can be opened here remotely, and deposits are relatively low. But generally speaking, we have very mixed feelings about Georgia. And yes, I know that everyone who's ever uttered a word about international banking, they tell you that Georgia is amazing and they rave about the banking options here. They'll tell you that you can open accounts remotely, deposits are very low, and customer support is world class. And while that sounds great, around 95% of our clients, they open remotely everywhere in the world. And we feel that the deposits required by Georgian banks, they're actually pretty high, especially when you compare them to some of the larger banks in much more stable jurisdictions where you can open for the same or even lower amounts. And while the customer service is decent at a few Georgian banks, it's hardly a distinguishing factor when you compare that to premier banking or even private banking in other banking jurisdictions. Now, I'm not even talking about concerns over political instability, disputed territories, or any potential threat from Russia in the future. So the big question is, should you bank in Georgia? Yeah, maybe, but only if you're struggling to open accounts and meet deposit requirements in better jurisdictions. If that's you, then yes, Georgia can be a viable option. It's a good backup banking hub for international accounts as a non-resident. It's got a relatively clean reputation, and so far it's managed to maintain a relatively stable position politically and socially, though there are some issues at the moment. Now, deposits here, they're going to start around 10,000 US dollars, maybe a little bit lower or higher depending on the bank, and they can be opened remotely, usually without the help of a lawyer, though this sometimes is required depending on the bank and your profile. But again, I wouldn't deposit more than is required here to open the account, and if you can, I'd first look at going elsewhere instead. In fact, this next country that I'm going to talk about, this is an interesting option, and you might want to consider this before opening in Georgia, and that is the Isle of Man. Now, the Isle of Man is a place I've talked about before. It's safe, it's stable, it has low deposits, and offers both personal and premier banking, which can be opened remotely at low deposit levels. And it even has commercial banking, though this typically is reserved for entities with a local TCSP. And all of this, it makes the Isle of Man a really good comparison to Georgia and a few other major banking hubs in Europe, because accounts, they can be opened 100% online. Deposits range from about $5,000 to $50,000 depending on the type of account you want to open. And a few of the banks in the Isle of Man, they can even onboard clients from higher risk jurisdictions like Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and certain Latin American countries. But the real selling point for the Isle of Man, it has to be stability. It's basically an outpost for the City of London. And while there seems to be a lot of shakeups happening around the city right now, the Isle of Man and other dependencies and overseas territories appear to be rock solid, with strong banks, supportive legislation, and an increasing appetite for non-resident deposits. That said, we don't typically suggest the Isle of Man for premier or private banking, even though those options do exist. Instead, we find that our clients, they're better served at banks in more established premier and private banking jurisdictions like Jersey, Switzerland, and even Liechtenstein, though this does depend on the client profile and the deposit amounts. Now, this brings us to country number 5. But before I reveal this overlooked banking option that many people skip over for more expensive jurisdictions, if you've made it this far in the video, don't forget to give us a like so that we know we should keep making more videos like this for you in the future. All right, country number 5 is Liechtenstein. Now, Liechtenstein is a very well-established private banking hub. It's low risk, it offers remote account opening, it has sophisticated wealth management and private banking solutions, and as you might expect, it requires high deposits to get in. Now, depending on who you are and how much money you have, Liechtenstein could be considered the gold standard for private banking. Or, as one of my super wealthy friends once described it, a truck stop in the middle of Europe. But no matter what you think of Liechtenstein, it is one of the largest wealth management jurisdictions in the world. And from a banking perspective, we think Liechtenstein is an overlooked option that more people should be considering. And in particular, there are two things that set Liechtenstein apart from comparable options like neighboring Switzerland and Austria, or even European options like Luxembourg and Monaco. And that is risk tolerance and deposit amounts. Now, in terms of risk, we've seen Liechtenstein banks be much more open to more challenging profiles, both in terms of individual and private accounts, as well as certain entities. Now, these are entities and individuals that are typically going to be struggling to bank in other jurisdictions. So if you have a high risk profile, meaning you're engaged in activities that maybe most banks are going to look down on, crypto being the easiest example, then certain banks here, they're worth considering. And in terms of deposits, you can usually get the conversation started here with around 500,000 Swiss francs, though if you're one of those high risk profiles that I just referred to, you'll probably need somewhere between 1 million and 3 million francs. All right, so you may have noticed that I didn't cover a few major offshore and private banking hubs: Switzerland, Luxembourg, Jersey, Cyprus, even Portugal. Well, I have some good news for you. I break down each of these countries along with more details on the 5 countries that I just mentioned in our free guide, Where to Bank in Europe. Like I said earlier in the video, you can grab a free copy from the pinned comment below. And if you're in the mood for even more international banking secrets, here's a video that I recently published that outlines the 3 strategies that our clients use to open bank accounts 100% remotely. So give that a click and I'll see you right over there.